everything.
Alright guys, today we're going to be doing the free CodeCamp URL Shortner Microservice. One thing to note is you're going to need Node installed on your computer as well as MongoDB. As of right now, I don't have a plan to do a video on that, but hopefully you already have that installed. What we'll be making our application here, our backend microservice application, is HTML, CSS, JavaScript, a little bit of Angular. If you don't know any Angular, don't sweat it. It's literally 1 or 2 lines. And then we're also going to be doing a front-end application of this where you can actually enter the URL this way and just click this to create it. And we'll be doing Express and MongoDB and Mongoose, if I didn't say that already. So what are we trying to make? We're essentially trying to make something that when we go to one of my favorite sites, slickdeals.com, and we go to, you know what, let's give a shout out to the homie who helped me out when I needed help, which is thebestjs.com. This is Stephen Mayu's tutoring site. You'll see right here, we enter that in. This will be our original URL. And then look at this shorter URL. This shorter URL, when we concatenate it here, it's going to redirect us to thebestjs.com. That's basically all we're going to do. Where you can then go get tutoring and things like that in front end and full stack web development. So let's go ahead and get started. Start this bad boy fresh. Alright, so to get started, go ahead and open up your text editor or your IDE. I'll be using Visual Studio Code if you want to do the same that I'm doing. So we're going to create a new project. I'm just going to go ahead and call this new folder. This will be something like URL YouTube. This will be where I have my project. There we go there. So in our project here, we're going to have a couple different folders. The first thing we're going to create, though, is our app.js. Or actually, we're going to install npm. So pull up your terminal. If you're using Visual Studio Code, you can do it like so. And go ahead and jump over to the terminal here and do npm init. And this is going to install npm to our page. Some of this is going to be the pretty basic setup. So if you're familiar with all this, you can go ahead and skip through. So URL short is what we're going to call this. URL underscore short will be the name. You'll notice if we try to hit enter here, we won't be able to because you can't name things with caps. So we'll just go ahead and do URL short here. And this will be index.js. I'm actually going to name it app.js. Some people like server.js. I just happen to like app. So now that we have our package.json, you'll notice that we don't have any dependencies yet. We're going to add those in a second. But first, let's go ahead and create our app.js. This is basically going to be our Node application. We're going to install a few things. We're going to install Express, so that's npm install --save Express. We're going to install cores. We're going to install body parser. Cores will help us with cross-origin requests, just so that we don't have any issues with that. And then we're going to do body parser, which will basically allow us to return a JSON object easily, as we saw before. And then we're also going to be using Mongoose, which is a package to basically just allow us to work with MongoDB a lot easier. So we installed Express. So we're going to do the same thing. This is npm install --save, and that --save is actually going to add it to our package.json here, so that if someone were to pull this file, and if you're a Patreon member, you'll have access to all the source code and all that sort of stuff. You'll be able to get this. So anyhow, npm install --save cores. Give it a second. All right, npm install --save body -parser. And finally, we are going to install Mongoose. And also, if you don't have NodeMon installed, install that as well. I have it installed globally, so I'm not going to run that command, but I highly encourage you to use NodeMon. That's NODEMON. Install that globally. Although it's not crucial, it's going to make your development time a lot easier moving forward, so you don't have to close the server and keep relaunching it. All right, so that was body parser, and we're gonna do npm install dash save mongoose, and that will be the last package that we install for this application. Oh, it's going slowly but surely. Is it stuck? No, there it goes. Cool. So that's all our packages, all our dependencies. You can see the 4 that are right here. All right, now in app.js, we're basically going to get requirements, essentially, and we're gonna have these consts. We're basically gonna have some variables. One's gonna be called express, and this is gonna be equal to require. And what do we want to require for our server, our Express app? First, we need to say, hey, we're going to use Express. Same thing with, oh, excuse me, my mistake. So we are going to, we have const express, require express, and then we're going to create an app. So the next thing that we're going to do is create our application here, which is going to be equal to express. Basically just creating our Express application at the end of the day. So the next thing we have to do is do the same requirements for body parser. And we're going to set that equal to require. Oops. Body dash parser. And we're going to do the same thing for go ahead and Control C this. We're going to do the same thing for mongoose and cores. And that will be cores. Control C this, paste that in here. All we're doing is basically all the black magic, voodoo, as Engineered Truth would say, another common word for setup. So we're doing all the setup, right? So the next part of the setup is we have to basically tell our Express app to use, remember our app here, to use the packages or parts of the packages that we're doing. So we're saying, hey, make sure you use bodyparser.json and also app.use cores. Nice. So now that we have that set up, the next thing that you typically want to do is you want to make sure that your node server is actually running properly. The way that we do this is we can get requirements and set instances of them. So that's the first section. The next section here, and we'll go ahead and jump down to the bottom a little bit, is listen to see if everything is working. And so the way that we do that is with our express app.listen, and then you pass in a port number here, which is, we'll do 3000, and then we have our callback function. If you're not too familiar with ES6, this is the equivalent of a callback function. The ES5 version would be something like this, function, and then you'd put whatever parameters in here. In this case, we don't have any, and then these brackets. It's just a shorthand way. And we'll go ahead and put ES5 here. ES5 and below. And so this is our ES6 version. Callback function. Something I'm trying to get better at is doing more ES6 syntax, but let's go ahead and console.log out our everything is working. One thing I'm going to do right now, and I'll put a little comment here, is if you're launching this on Heroku, which I believe the free code camp will have you do, is you want to use this process env port. And what that's basically going to do is if it runs on Heroku, it's actually going to go get the port number that's associated with that instead of this 3000. This 3000 is going to work locally because this port here does not exist. Process is for if on Heroku. So basically what's happening here is it's saying, hey, if this exists, set this as the value. If it doesn't, set it to 3000. That's all that's going on here. And we're doing this in case you want to deploy to Heroku, and so that you don't have to go back and change your application down the road. Now, let's go ahead and launch our application. Again, I'm using NodeMon, so it's going to be as simple as typing that in. And if everything's set up, you'll see everything is working right here. So we have our Node application up and going. Before we jump into the Mongoose stuff, I'm going to try to set up as much as I can elsewhere. Now, we're going to have 2 Git calls. One is going to be app.get. This one will be the one that creates the database entry. And we're going to break this down piece by piece. So the way that I do it is I just have it go to a relative URL path. So we'll do app.get. This should actually probably be a post, but right now it really doesn't matter. Because we're creating something new in the database, so we're posting to the database. One second, looking at my example here. And so where do we want to get? We want to get to this relative URL path, which is new. And then we have this parameter here, which is going to be URL to shorten. Now, we're going to on the end, we're going to have these little parentheses here and this asterisk. The reason that this is being included here is because later on we will run into an issue where it's actually, if it's a HTTP : those double slashes, it's going to actually think we're trying to go into a folder subdirectory. This is instead basically going to say accept it all as part of the string regardless of how it's formatted, and we'll avoid that issue because the way that we're going to be creating this is that we're just going to pass in a string that hits this /new, and let's say http://google.com, and it's going to take that parameter and it's going to add it to the database and do what it does. And we don't want it to think that it's going to a folder path. That's basically what this is doing, saying accept everything that's part of here as part of the string. That's all. And the next, again, we're going to be having callback function. This is going to be the request, the response, and then next. We're not going to actually use that. And then our callback function like so. So cool. This is our first function, or not function, our first get call. And then we'll go ahead and create a second get call, which, well, first let's go ahead and test this, right? Console.log. Let's get the param, right? So to get the param, we just have to, we can go ahead and store it in a variable. I like to do URL to shorten. And this is equal to our request.params. And we're going to go ahead and do some ES6 right now and use this, I believe it's called a deconstructor. And what this is basically going to do is it's just going to save us a little bit of typing. So the ES5 version of this would be var URL to shorten is equal to rec.params.url to shorten. So these little curly braces will save us some typing time down the road. We have our URL to shorten here, and it just assumes with these curly braces that that's what we're looking for if it's the same name as the variable. Now let's go ahead and console.log URL to shorten. Very nice. Everything is working, so our server is good. So what we're going to do now is go into our browser. We're going to go localhost 3000. Nothing's going to be here, right? So, but what we want to do is test new slash new slash Dylan. And what we should get is, it's actually going to error out, so that's my fault. But you'll see that we actually get the response here. The reason it's erroring out, or is that we never actually return anything. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the server and then turn it back on. That's my fault. But you guys get the point there, is that this is all working properly, which is great. Now what we can do before we get into the real logic of things is we are going to go ahead and create our front end real quick. Now, to create our front end, typically how you would do it is you'd create this folder called public. Now, your Node.js application isn't going to have access to index files or anything like that unless you give it access to it, essentially. And so let's go ahead and just create our index.html. And in here we'll have, you know, all the basic stuff. So we'll have our doc type, HTML, and then have our HTML tags. Oops. And then we'll have a header and stuff like that. So we'll have our head tag / head. And then we will have our body tag / body. And in here we'll have, we'll just go ahead and throw a header tag in here. And in here, we'll kind of, I always think it's nice to have front end for your back end applications. You can make it as fancy as you want. You saw earlier, mine's not super fancy, but we'll just go ahead and throw a h3 tag in here. And this will be URL Shortner Microservice. And then below that, definitely you want to give a shout out to Free Code Camp. I always try to, because I want people to know, you know, free code camp. I want people to know where they can, you know, where I do these videos, and so they can go become fans of Free Code Camp. And let's go ahead and wrap this in an anchor tag, just some basic HTML. This will go to https://www.freecodecamp.com. We'll go ahead and set the target equal to blank, so it opens up in a new window. Close that, and /a. Let's just go ahead and drop it down a little bit so it's a little bit more readable. So that opens up to there, and because I want to give a shout out to myself, I will go ahead and I'm actually just going to copy this in here to save us some time. By now, I'm sure all of you know how all this stuff works, but I'll have an anchor tag to my channel, as well as my logo, which I'm going to add into a, it's always good to have good folder structure as well. So you'll see I have this image file here that goes into public, and let's go get that logo image. Just go into Creative Cloud Files, YouTube, and what was it? Logo whiteback.png. Logo white. And we'll go ahead and drag that into image. There we go. Cool. So we have our image. We set a width of it to 250. And then we have my YouTube channel here. Now, one thing I like to include in my projects as well, especially this is if you're trying to build a portfolio, is I always like to list what technologies we're going to be using, just so that people can kind of see a quick synopsis of what they're working with or what you worked with. So you'll see we're going to be using Node Express, MongoDB, Mongoose, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. And I'm going to go ahead and copy over the Bootstrap tag. We're just using Bootstrap 3 right now. I don't feel like jumping into Bootstrap 4. I'm not too familiar with Bootstrap 4. I haven't used it. So, what is going on here? What is the fuck going on? There we go. Alright. Excuse my language. So let's go ahead and add Bootstrap. The only reason we're really adding Bootstrap is because I'm kind of, if I wanted to style it more, I didn't really do too much styling, but just go ahead and add this class text center so everything is centered. Now, if you're, you'll notice now that if we were to actually go to localhost 3000, we don't actually still get this, we get this cannot get because it's still expecting a backend get call. So what we have to do is, let's jump back into our app.js, is we have to basically tell it, hey, we want you to use these files for the front end. And the way to do it so that it hits everything in this public folder, which is why it's in a folder, is we can do app.use, and this is express.static. And then in here is just underscore underscore dir name plus, and then the name of that, which is public / public. So allows node to find static content, basically. So everything is working, and now when we go back to localhost 3000, we should get a hastily made little page here. And while we're at it, let's go ahead and add our quick input as well, because if you remember, we have a little input. So jump back into the index.html. So in the header, right below header, we'll create a section /section, and in here we're just going to have an input. And we'll just go ahead and assign a placeholder. Set this to enter URL, and then we'll I'll eventually assign some Angular. And then we'll have an A class is equal to btn -primary. These are just bootstrap classes to make our not very pretty application look pretty /a, and then we will get the short URL. And so I'll do a quick rundown of some Angular. I'm an Angular developer at work, so that's why we're using Angular. We're going to need a script tag. And this is only if you want to do a front end. You don't have to do a front end, but I'll give you a quick rundown of Angular. So the first thing you want to do is use the script tag, get your Angular library. We're using 1.6.1, so this is going to be Angular 1, not Angular 2 or 3, or I believe they're up to 4 now. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create a JavaScript file in public. Again, good folder structure will save you a lot of headaches. And in here, we're going to create another file called app.js. This will be our Angular application. And we're going to have basically 3 lines here. This is going to be var app is equal to angular.module. And what we're basically doing is creating our Angular application, and we're going to name it right now. We're going to call it short URL app. And then we're going to have this comma and then these empty brackets. These empty brackets are for any dependencies in Angular. We don't have any. That's why they're empty. And then we're going to instantiate the controller for it, which is basically going to be, the way I like to explain controllers is the logic for your app for a certain section of the app, right? So imagine that your app is built up of 4 mini applications. Each one of those controllers is a mini application. And so you have your controllers, so short app controller. So that's the name of that controller. It's going to be associated with our app. You only have one app, and you can have as many controllers as you want, but only one app. And then we'll have this function, and then we'll have this parameter here called scope. What scope is scope, and since we're doing ES6, let's go ahead and do this. Scope is what allows us to connect our HTML variable, or our JavaScript variables, with HTML variables, basically. And so if we do something like this, scope.test, and we set this equal to hello world, and then we jump into our index file, and right above this we go ahead and with these curly braces, 2 sets of them, we put test, and we actually, so same name as this, not the scope though, and then we can actually in our input do ng-model, and this will give us, we'll set this to test as well. Better yet, let's actually name the variable what I'm going to name it, which was, so we don't have to go back, URL to shorten. So let's jump back into here. We have this scope.url to shorten, and then in here in our index page, our ng model. All this is basically connecting the variable in the HTML to that in the JavaScript, so that if our input changes, which it will, right? That's where we're going to put our URL. We're going to then do something with it later. But now if we jump over to our index page, we refresh this, you'll see Oh, and it's not working because we have to actually connect the application. So before we do that, let's go ahead and create a script tag that takes the source of where that's located. And this will be JS. Let's see, JS/app. JS/app.js. This file right here. Now let's close that. Save it, and now let's go ahead and refresh it. Interesting. So why is it not working? Whoops, silly me, guys. So we have to actually just instantiate our app real quick. The way that, remember how we named our application here, short URL app, we just have to go ng app and kind of showcase where we want our Angular app to run based off our tags. We want it to run on everything that's within the HTML tags. So we have ng app, short URL app, and then we have to define the controller. And we can go ahead and do that on this section because that's the only place that we need it to run. So ng controller, and we'll set that equal to, what did I name the controller? I named it short app controller. There we go. And refresh this, and I promise it'll work now. So there we go, hello world. And you'll notice that as we change this, we're actually dynamically changing it as well. So if we were to go www.google.com, and the reason I have an input like this is all we're gonna do is we're gonna take this button and we're gonna concatenate it with our relative URL, but we're gonna attach this on the end, //new/ www.google, for instance, and it's actually going to go send us to the endpoint that's going to create our database entry. So before we end this first video here, let's do that. We can do this in Angular. You don't have to. Again, this front end is completely optional, but we're just going to use ng-href, which is going to be /new, our relative path, right? /new/, and we want it to be this right here. So URL to shorten. And so what's going to happen is when we click that button, our right now I believe all we're going to have is this var URL to shorten. When we click it, what we want to do return is we'll just do an object here to showcase this so it doesn't time out. URL to shorten or res.json. So to return a JSON object, we can show you how to do that real quick. We want our response.json and then the object that we're trying to pass in. So in this case, we can go ahead and just have URL to shorten and pass it in like that. And this is some ES6, so because our parameter that we want to set it equal to is the same as this, we don't actually need to set anything. And let's go ahead and refresh this. And now when we set hello world, let's do www.google.com, get short URL, you'll see that it goes down here and it returns our value that we set from the beginning. So one last thing is let's go ahead and remove this binding and the initial value before we move on to the next video here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get rid of that. We don't actually have to create the value. It'll create it in the view in the index.html, and then we're actually going to get rid of it here. So in the next video, what we're going to do is we're going to start working with the Mongoose aspect of it, and we're going to connect to our database. We are then going to create our collection, which essentially is where we put our Mongoose. A collection is kind of, if you're familiar with SQL databases, would be our table, except they're kind of our rows in our table. And the collection itself is a table, and our documents are essentially a row in that table. And so we're going to define the collection or the structure of those documents, and then we're actually going to add to the database. So we're going to be doing a lot of Mongoose in the next video. As always, guys, thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and share, and join our Facebook group, Code Tech and Caffeine. And if you want to support me, you can at patreon.com/codingtutorials360. I appreciate you guys watching. I'll see you in the next video. Hey guys, thanks for watching the video. If you're interested in coding bootcamp, check out devmountain.com, where housing is included in your price of tuition. And don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share, and support me on Patreon. I'll see you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.